Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live stream. Today we're covering chapter 17 of our compendium, and you can follow along on our website, www.tarpeia.us. Tarpeia is spelled Tarpeia.us, and this is chapter 17 of the compendium. And so this is what the chapter page looks like on our website. And this chapter, which covers World War One, and it covers the years 1913 to 1921. So this is all 8 years of the Woodrow Wilson administration. And this chapter is divided into two sections. The first section is called New Freedom, and this covers Wilson's first term. And then the next section is called Over There, and this covers the second term of the Wilson administration. And so let's look at the first one, section 1 of this chapter. Woodrow Wilson enters the presidency promising a new freedom aimed at restoring competition, curbing concentrated power, and reviving democratic governance in an industrial age. His administration enacted sweeping domestic reforms, including the Underwood Tariff to lower rates, the Federal Reserve Act to stabilize finance and credit, and the Clayton Antitrust Act to strengthen labor protections while restraining monopolies. Progressive regulation expanded through the creation of the Federal Trade Commission, signaling a permanent federal role in managing capitalism. Abroad, Wilson pursued moral diplomacy, intervening repeatedly in Latin America while struggling to maintain neutrality in World War One engulfed Europe, as World War One engulfed Europe. Despite mounting pressures abroad, domestic public opinion and Wilson's own campaign promises remained firmly committed to neutrality and keeping the United States out of war. So the first document that we include is Woodrow Wilson's first inaugural address, which he gave on March 4th, 1913. J.P. Morgan, the financier of the industrial age, of the Gilded Age, dies just a few weeks after Wilson takes office. The 17th Amendment, which replaced the state election of senators with a more democratic, popular vote for senators within the states. Woodrow Wilson's message regarding tariff duties. So tariffs were a major issue during this time. You have a lot of people wanting to keep tariffs low, and then you have a lot of people wanting to keep tariffs high. At this point, the Democrats are the ones wanting low tariffs, while the Republicans like the high tariffs. There's a lot of parallel going on, but this is something that has been going on for literally over 100 years at this point. You have the Federal Reserve Act, which introduced in the House to create the Federal Reserve. You have Woodrow Wilson's New Freedom book, a short book about what he believes should be like a new Bill of Rights for the American people, specifically workers. So this is very similar to what FDR would advocate for, and even Bill Clinton will advocate for, like a workers' Bill of Rights during this time. So this is really in the aftermath of the Gilded Age. How can we reorganize and, I guess, reinstitutionalize labor relations with capital? So labor and capital are big conflict during this time, during the Gilded Age, and now the World Wars era. You have Woodrow Wilson's address on his policy with Mexico. In Mexico right now, you have Mexican Revolution, and that's going to cause a lot of problems when it comes to securing our border. He will send General Pershing to secure the border, fighting people like Pancho Villa, and although Pershing won't be able to get Pancho Villa, because Woodrow Wilson will never give Pershing the permission to actually invade Mexico to take out the border ruffians of the Mexican Revolution. You have the Underwood Tariff of 1913. This is to decrease tariff rates. If Wilson, he opens the Panama Canal, so he flips a switch in the White House that blows up the Gamboa Dike, causing water to flow into the Panama Canal, linking the Atlantic and Pacific. So it's interesting that it's Woodrow Wilson. He's the one who actually gets to open up the Panama Canal. A lot of people think, it's McKinley or it's Teddy Roosevelt or Taft. It was actually Woodrow Wilson in 1913. We have his 1913 State of the Union address, the Federal Reserve Act, which created the Federal Reserve. A lot of people don't like the Federal Reserve. It makes sense why a lot of people, especially libertarian types, don't like the Federal Reserve setting interest rates, but people can't really doubt, at least from an economic standpoint, that the Federal Reserve has helped manage the financial situation of the country since its creation. You do have the Great Depression, but the Great Depression wasn't caused by the Federal Reserve. I hear some people argue, like, oh, the Federal Reserve were the ones who caused it or didn't do anything to stop it. There were much bigger entities around and causes than the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve was just in its infancy when the Great Depression began in 1929. It's 16 years. So, and also people didn't really understand finance to begin with and economics. Like that very famous book, General Theory on Economics, by Keynes. That didn't come out until during the Great Depression to explain why the Great Depression happened. So people didn't understand economics as well as they did after the Great Depression, and also the Federal Reserve was not designed to handle the causes of the Great Depression. So I wouldn't blame the Federal Reserve at all. Then we have the Supreme Court decision, Weeks v. U.S., Tampico incident, where U.S. Marines are detained by Mexican officials, requests authorization from Congress to use force in Mexico following the Tampico incident. I have to replace the image, but this should be the Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated on June 28th, 1914. His assassination precedes the World War I. And so on July 28th, a month later, you have Austria declares war on Serbia. Russia mobilizes for war against Austria in defense of Serbia, because Serbia is a fellow Slavic nation. Germany declares war on Russia because they're allied with Austria. So now this brings the Germans into the war. And because France was allied with Russia, the Germans decided to declare war on the French. So now the French are involved in the conflict. And in order to beat the French, the Germans implement the Schlieffen Plan, which requires them to go around French defenses, the Maginot Line, on the French-German border, by going through neutral Belgium. Belgium was allied with Britain, and so this brings the British into the war. So, a Serbian nationalist killing the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire causes the Russians to get involved, or causes the Austrians to go to war with Serbia, and Russia declares war on Austria to defend the Serbians, and the Germans declare war on Russia to defend the Austrians, and the Germans also declare war on France because France was allied with the Russians, and in order to beat the French, the Germans invade neutral Belgium, which was allied with Britain. bringing the British into the war. So the web of alliances is what took a very small conflict. It could have just been a fight between Serbian nationalists and the Austrians, turned into World War One because of this web of alliances. And so that is called the Thucydides trap. Thucydides is an ancient Greek guy, and he feared that if you have a web of alliances, if one country goes to war, this will drag other countries into the war. So a small conflict will lead to a much bigger conflict, an unnecessary conflict. And that's exactly what happened leading up to World War One. You have a small conflict between Serbia and Austria. This dragged in a bunch of other countries who were allied with those two countries, and now you have World War One. Austria declares war on Russia, August 6, 1914. Woodrow Wilson gives a speech on neutrality, and I made a video of me reading this speech if you're interested in listening to the whole speech. It is kind of pertinent today. A lot of common themes that might apply to today that I may or may not agree with. I'm not necessarily a Wilson defender. I don't really like Wilson all too much. But this speech, the arguments that he gives for maintaining neutrality in World War One is actually pretty good and relates to what's going on today. You have the Federal Trade Commission Act. This creates the Federal Trade Commission, Clayton Antitrust Act, which further decreased the tariff rates. Woodrow Wilson's 1914 State of the Union address. You have the infamous Birth of a Nation movie. This is an American silent epic drama film directed by D.W. Griffith and starring Lillian Gish. The screenplay is adapted from Thomas Dixon Jr.'s 1905 novel and play, The Klansman, a historical romance of the KKK. Griffith co-wrote the screenplay with Frank E. Woods and produced the film with Harry Aitken. And also Woodrow Wilson makes an appearance, not in person, he's quoted in the movie. And so I think that's pertinent because Woodrow Wilson is president while this movie comes out, and this movie is the first movie ever screened at the White House. And I think Woodrow Wilson does it because he's in the movie. Siemens Act. Let's see, sinking of the USS Lusitania. They will blame the Germans on this, which makes sense. The Germans did do it. Guillen and Bell v. United States, a Supreme Court decision. Booker T. Washington dies. So this is his procession on November 17th. William J. Simmons becomes the first Grand Wizard of the KKK, and he's a Presbyterian, a Scottish Presbyterian, and he will revive, at least participate in the revival of the KKK by becoming the first Imperial Grand Wizard, and leading a cross-burning ceremony on top of Stone Mountain, Georgia, on Thanksgiving night, November 15th, or November 1915, to mark the organization's rebirth after being inspired by the film Birth of a Nation, which came out earlier that year. Let's see, Wilson's 1915 State of the Union. Uh-oh. Yeah, we are adult, mature content, and so I should have skipped that. We do have images of the aftermath of certain crimes, lynchings, and I don't want to show it too much on YouTube. Say, Louis, it is history. This is entirely educational, by the way. So, Let's see how YouTube handles that. Let's see, Louis Brandeis confirmed as Associate Justice. The famous Uncle Sam poster. This is made in July of 1916, and the original one is "What are you doing for preparedness?" And so this is advocating for U.S. involvement in World War One. When we enter World War One, they're going to change the caption to "I want you to join the army," or also "I want you to buy war bonds." The Federal Road Act of 1916. What's interesting about this act is that this was mostly to increase or improve the infrastructure of the road system in the United States for the U.S. Army. And so General Pershing, he was tasked with assessing the road system of the United States, which at this point is just dirt roads. There are no paved roads crisscrossing the nation. And he will make a report, General Pershing will make a report with the help of a certain Lieutenant Dwight D. Eisenhower. General Pershing is a mentor to Eisenhower. He's a mentor to a bunch of World War I and World War II leaders. He's a mentor to Eisenhower. He's a mentor to Patton. He's a mentor to MacArthur. He's a mentor to Bradley. So all of like the top generals that we all know and love and sometimes hate, General Pershing was his mentor, and so, or all of their mentors. You have the Federal Farm Loan Act. This is to give loans to farmers. Now, why would farmers need loans at this time? Well, World War I is happening, and the farms of Europe are completely destroyed at this point. And so food production in Europe has gone down. This increases the cost or price of food because there's a decrease in supply of food while demand isn't really decreasing. Well, I guess demand does technically decrease if you kill people, but the supply of food was going down more than the demand of food was going down, which means the difference between the two was expanding, which means price goes up. And so a lot of farmers wanted to, in the United States, wanted to increase their food production in order to sell more food at the higher price to make more profit. Well, they might not have, the farmers might not have a lot of cash on hand needed to buy more equipment or more labor in order to produce more food. And so the farmers would take out these massive loans from the government, from private banks, in order to have cash now so that they can invest in increasing the equipment, increasing their workforce, to increase their yield of food produce in order to sell it to Europe. And so this new investment will actually be one of the causes of the Great Depression, because later down the line, I mean, the war's going to end in a couple years. The loans are supposed to be a lot longer than just a few years. And within a couple years in Europe, the farms of Europe are going to bounce back and they're going to be able to produce food again. And so you have a bunch of American farmers with massive amounts of loans that they took out in order to invest in increasing their food production, in order to make a profit selling more food at the higher price. Well, now prices are going back down. But they still have to pay these loans back. But they're not making as much money anymore. And so a lot of farmers are going to go bankrupt or default on their loans. And this will affect the banks who loaned out the money in the first place, and this will be one of the causes of the Great Depression, the farming situation in the United States. It's not the only issue. For the 1920s, there's a lot of speculation in the stock market. There's a lot of enthusiasm and optimism for the future now that the Great War is over, which will lead to a boom bust cycle in the economy. You have the Black Tom bombing, which happened on July 30th, 1916, where German agents blew up 2 million pounds of war materials packed into train cars in the Black Tom Railroad Yard on what is now part of Liberty State Park. Thousands of windows shattered in lower Manhattan and New Jersey and Jersey City. Shrapnel pockmarked the Statue of Liberty. Several people were killed in the explosive energy that erupted from this act of sabotage. Over $20 million in damages, which is over $500 million today. The culprits were never identified, but they were suspected to be German. There's a lot of German hate at this time, by the way. You have the Philippine Autonomy Act to grant the Philippines more autonomy, as they're going to be transitioned from a territory to a independent country, but that process takes a long time, and that won't finalize until after World War II. You have the Keating-Owen Child Labor Act to outlaw child labor. Adamson Act, the election of Woodrow Wilson. Wilson's State of the Union address in 1916. You have the Silent Sentinels picket the White House. Members of the newly formed National Women's Party, founded by Alice Paul, called the Silent Sentinels, picketed the White House and were the first group to organize such a picket. So these are the first people to picket outside the White House. And then you have the infamous Zimmerman telegram, which is made public on March 1st, 1917, after the election, convenient for Wilson, and right before his inaugural address for his second term. And so this takes us to Section 2 over there. This covers the second term of the Wilson administration. So the description that I wrote is Wilson's second term was defined by the transformation of the United States from a neutral republic into a global wartime power. American entry into World War I in April 1917 followed years of strained neutrality and unleashed an unprecedented expansion of federal authority, as Congress granted sweeping war powers through measures such as the Selective Service Act, the Espionage and Sedition Acts, the creation of wartime agencies to mobilize industry, labor, and finance. The war reshaped American society, accelerating industrial production and migration while sharply curtailing civil liberties and dissent at home. As the fighting ended, the nation was convulsed by unrest, including anarchist bombings, the first Red Scare, and a wave of racial violence in 1919 that exposed the fragility of wartime unity. Even amid repression and fear, the era produced lasting democratic change with the ratification of the 18th Amendment establishing prohibition and the 19th Amendment extending suffrage to women, marking a contradictory legacy of expanded rights alongside intensified state power and social division, including racial division. Sarah Wilson's second inaugural address, given on March 5th, 1917. Soon after, Wilson will give his war message to Congress, advocating for war, and the Senate will vote for war against Germany on April 6, 1917. You have the Wake Up Parade, or Wake Up America Parade. So President Wilson called for large recruitment into the armed forces, and these Wake Up America parades were held in many places across the country in support of recruitment. The surprising amount of 60,000 people attended this single parade in New York. So these are the Boy Scouts charging up and down Fifth Avenue with American flags. You have the Espionage Act. This law significantly expanded the president's and the federal government's domestic security powers during wartime, penalizing interference with national defense, restricting communications, and allowing control over mail or publications deemed dangerous, thereby strengthening the executive's capacity to suppress dissent or perceived subversion in wartime. You have the Trading with the Enemy Act. This act granted the president sweeping authority during wartime to regulate or restrict trade and financial transactions with enemy nations and nationals, to control imports, exports, foreign exchange, and to oversee property owned by enemies within U.S. jurisdiction. Through TWEA, the executive acquired a powerful economic security tool, enabling seizure or control of foreign assets, restrictions on commerce, and broad regulation of economic ties in war. And so many of these acts are still being used today. And the Balfour Declaration, I gotta change the image for that, which is a declaration by the British to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. You have Buchanan v. Worley, Supreme Court decision. You have the Night of Terror. Alice Paul and other suffragettes were arrested starting June 1917 and imprisoned at the Occoquan workhouse. While imprisoned, she organized hunger strikes, leading to force feeding and public outrage, especially after the Night of Terror, when prisoners were brutally beaten. You have Wilson's 1917 State of the Union. You have this infamous wartime propaganda poster, Beat Back the Hun, with Liberty Bonds. So I'm going to be adding more of these documents, of these propaganda documents to the timeline, because I think they're kind of cool. And you have Woodrow Wilson's 14 points speech that he gives advocating for the 14 points. Samuel Gomper's speech on the war effort. Warren G. Harding's The Republic Must Awaken address. You have Ambassador James Garrard loyalty address. And these are actual audio recordings from the Library of Congress of these addresses. General Pershing address from the battlefields of France in March 1918. You have the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. It ended Russia's participation in World War I, forcing Russia to cede vast territories, including Ukraine, Finland, the Baltic states, and parts of Poland, allowing Germany to shift its military focus to the Western Front. You have another lynching, this time of a German named Robert Prager. He is lynched by a mob for his anti-war speech. You have the Sedition Act of 1918. This act was an amendment to the Espionage Act of 1917. It broadened federal authority to suppress anti-war speech, publications, and political dissent during wartime. The act made it a crime to speak, write, or publish anything deemed disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive about the U.S. government, the Constitution, the military, the flag, or the war effort. It expanded the federal government's wartime policing powers, allowing Wilson's administration, through the Postmaster General, the Justice Department, and newly empowered federal prosecutors, to silence critics of conscription, propaganda, and war policy. Hundreds of socialists, labor activists, pacifists, and anti-war speakers were arrested and imprisoned. The post office, under presidential appointed Postmaster General Albert Burleson, banned dozens of newspapers and magazines from the mails, effectively shutting them down. Prominent figures like Eugene V. Debs received long prison sentences, under the act for speaking against the draft. The Supreme Court upheld many convictions, endorsing the doctrine of clear and present danger. You have the Departmental Reorganization Act. This law authorized the president to reorganize the executive branch, its agencies, and government corporations for the duration of the war and for 6 months after its end. Using that authority, Wilson set up wartime agencies, war industries coordination, labor boards, propaganda information offices, giving the executive essentially broad administrative control over the federal government. A major expansion of central power for the war effort. You have the trial of the lynching of Robert Prager. In less than 10 minutes, the jury returned not guilty verdicts for all defendants accused of killing Robert Prager, with one juror remarking, "I guess nobody can say we aren't loyal now." So a lot of war fervor will excuse, at this time, a lot of violence against people who are against the war. This is one of the first major offenses led by the United States, the AEF, American Expeditionary Forces. This results in the capture of the town Cantigny. It's in France. You have the Battle of Chateau Thierry. I cannot say any French names at all. American forces played a key role in defending the town against German attacks as part of the larger Second Battle of the Marne. The Battle of Belleau Woods. This intense battle saw fierce fighting as the U.S. Marines fought to dislodge German forces from the area. You have Hammer v. Dagenhart, which is a Supreme Court decision regarding child labor. Eugene V. Debs gives a speech criticizing the president and the war. This is the very speech that he will be arrested for. In fact, that's the next event on the timeline. You have the Second Battle of the Marne. The Second Battle of the Marne was the final major German offensive on the Western Front of World War I. Fought along the Marne River in France, it became a decisive Allied victory that marked a turning point toward the war's end. You have Wilson's aide-memoire outlined the limited purposes for American participation in the Allied intervention in Russia during the Russian Civil War. He stated that U.S. troops would safeguard military supplies at Archangel and Vladivostok, and assist the Czech legion's evacuation, while explicitly denying any intention to intervene in Russia's internal political struggle or wage war against the Bolshevik government. The document reflected Wilson's attempt to balance Allied pressure for broader intervention with his publicly stated principle of national self-determination. Wilson makes a proclamation on anti-German sentiment. It doesn't mention the lynching of Robert Prager, but since the lynching of Robert Prager had only recently happened, I think that was on his mind when he gave this proclamation. You have this image of U.S. troops marching in Vladivostok. And the Battle of Saint-Mihiel, AEF achieved a swift and decisive victory, capturing the Saint-Mihiel salient. Meuse-Argonne offensive, the largest offensive undertaken by the AEF. This battle involved over 1 million American soldiers and was instrumental in pushing the German forces back towards the end of the war. So this is now leading to the end of World War I. The United States had a major role to play in the last couple of battles. You have an Immigration Act to restrict immigration, especially from Eastern Europe. You have armistice, which is declared at 11 a.m., November 11th, 1918. So armistice goes into effect, effectively ending World War I. You still have the Russian Civil War going on. You still have a lot of other fighting around the world going on, but World War One, at least with Germany, is now over. Wilson's 1918 State of the Union address. The 18th Amendment is ratified. For those of you who don't know, the 18th Amendment is prohibition on the sale and production of alcohol. You have Schneck v. U.S., a Supreme Court decision, and I have this video by Mr. Beat from his channel. If anyone wants to watch it, make sure you check out his channel and subscribe if you like his content. There's another Supreme Court decision. This is Debs v. United States. That's Eugene v. Debs, the socialist who was arrested for his speech against the war effort. You have a Russian Civil War battle. You have the April anarchist bombings, a series of anarchist mail bomb attacks targeted government officials, business leaders, and law enforcement across the United States, with roughly 36 bombs discovered by postal authorities before they could detonate. One were killed, and several others were injured, and the campaign spread nationwide fear, helping to ignite the first Red Scare and heightened suspicion of radicals and immigrants, and also socialists and anarchists. You have the May 4th movement begins, a Chinese cultural and anti-imperialist political movement which grew out of student protests in Beijing on May 14th, 1919. Students gathered in front of Tiananmen to protest the Chinese government's weak response to the Treaty of Versailles decision to allow the Empire of Japan to retain territories in Shandong that had been surrendered by the German Empire after the siege of Tingsao? I'm really bad at pronouncing things. I'm sorry. In 1914, the demonstrations sparked nationwide protests and spurred an upsurge in Chinese nationalism, a shift towards political mobilization away from cultural activities, and a move toward a populist base away from traditional intellectual and political elites. So this movement, the May 4th movement, will lead into the Chinese Communist movement to create Communist China. You have the June 2nd anarchist bombings. Galleanists managed to detonate 9 large bombs nearly simultaneously in 8 cities. These bombs were much larger than the April bombings. None of the targets were killed, but one watchman was killed, and one of the anarchists were killed. FDR was a near casualty since he lived across the street from one of the targets. You have the 19th Amendment passes Congress and is sent to the states for ratification. You have the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, ending World War I. You have the Washington race riot, which sparked by rumors of black men assaulting white women, inflamed by sensationalist press coverage, leading to white mobs, many including off-duty servicemen, attacking African Americans in the Capitol, that's D.C. At least 15 people were killed and over 150 injured, and the unprecedented armed self-defense of black residents marked a turning point in racial violence during the Red Summer, demonstrating both the dangers of racial tensions after World War I and the growing refusal of African Americans to submit to mob violence. You have another race riot, the Chicago race riot, where violence erupted after the killing of a black teenager, Eugene Williams, who had drifted into a whites-only beach area, sparking a week of racial violence that left 38 people dead, 23 black, 15 white, over 500 injured, and thousands of black residents displaced. The riot exposed deep racial tensions in northern cities during the Great Migration, leading to greater awareness of systemic segregation and influencing the fight for civil rights in the decades that followed. Yeah, the 19th Amendment is ratified. On, let's see, August 18th, 1919, Senator Henry Cabot lodged address against the League of Nations. So now the World War I is over. The League of Nations is an idea, is a treaty idea that Woodrow Wilson wants us to join, but it has to be approved in the Senate. And so I have a couple of speeches from senators, both in favor of and opposed to the United States entering the League of Nations, and the United States will never enter the League of Nations. The League of Nations will fail to prevent World War II from happening and will be dissolved, eventually replaced by the United Nations. Here's the Elaine Massacre of September 30th to October 2nd, 1919. In Phillips County, Arkansas, violence erupted when black sharecroppers attempted to organize for fairer pay and against peonage, provoking a violent response from white posses and federal troops. Between 100 and 200 African Americans were killed, with only 5 white deaths reported, making it one of the deadliest racial conflicts in U.S. history, and it entrenched racial terror in the South while sparking national outrage that fueled early civil rights legal challenges. So, post World War I, while still being within the Wilson administration, you have a lot of racial tension. At the same time, you have the reemergence of the KKK, which started under Wilson's first term. That actually begins a little bit earlier, but the first Imperial Grand Wizard came out, or was announced after the movie Birth of a Nation came out in Wilson's first term. At the Volstead Act, this is to enforce prohibition. Abrams v. U.S., and this is a Supreme Court case regarding the pension for veterans. You have Centralia tragedy. In Centralia, Washington, violence broke out when members of the American Legion marched past the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW Union Hall, leading to gunfire between the Legionaries and the Wobblies, the Workers of the World, amid long simmering tensions over labor rights. The clash left at least 6 legionaries and 1 IWW member dead, several others injured, and resulted in a crackdown on radical labor organizing in the Pacific Northwest, deepening national hostility toward the IWW during the first Red Scare. You have Wilson's 1919 State of the Union address, where he's talking about the outcome of World War I and also talking about the racial unrest and also the labor unrest during the first Red Scare. We have Rupert v. Calfee, a Supreme Court decision. The ACLU is founded in 1920 during the Red Summer, or I guess this is right after Red Summer of 1919, where a lot of that racial violence was happening. You have American forces withdraw from Russia on April 1st, 1920. This ends America's involvement in the Russian Civil War. Warren G. Harding's readjustment address. So if you click on this link on our website, this will take you to an actual audio recording from the Library of Congress of Warren G. Harding. So if you want to listen to his voice, that's kind of cool. You have Harding's acceptance address for the Republican Party. You have FDR's Americanism address, another Library of Congress audio file. You have the election of Harding. He wins in 1920, and this is a video by Mr. Beat. He's made video covering every single presidential election, and we've added all of them to our timelines. And so check out this video and his channel. And also the 1920 election was the first time that the election results were broadcasted over radio. That's kind of cool. You have Wilson's 1920 State of the Union. This is his last one. He will treat this as like a farewell address. Most presidents at this point, they don't give a farewell address. That won't be something until Truman and Eisenhower will make that a tradition. Not, it wasn't a tradition at this point. So usually the last State of the Union address was the farewell address of the president. And right before the end of the Wilson administration, you have the repeal of the Sedition Act. So this repealed the Sedition Act passed at the start of his second term during the war. And this is the last thing that I have so far on this chapter. So this chapter, again, is chapter 17, which covers World War I from 1913 to 1921, which is, of course, Woodrow Wilson's administration at both of his terms. And if you want to check out this resource, this is our website, www.tarpeia.us. Tarpeia is spelled TARPEIA.us, and this is chapter 17 of the compendium. So if you go highlight in the menu, go to World Wars era, this is the chapter that I just showed you. Tomorrow, we're going to be covering the Roaring Twenties, which is the Harding and Coolidge administrations from 1921 to 1929. So if you're interested in the Roaring Twenties, stay tuned for tomorrow's live stream. And if you don't know about us, we are an educational nonprofit, a 501c3. All donations are tax deductible, and everything that we do, we put on our website, all of our history, resources, and material, like this interactive timeline of American history. I encourage you guys to check it out. And yeah, so tomorrow is going to be the Roaring Twenties chapter 18. So if you're interested in the Roaring Twenties, make sure to join me for that. If you have any questions about American history while I'm doing these live streams, feel free to comment them, and I will address them however I can, however best I can. So thank you if you were here for watching this live stream, and I hope you're having a good day, and I hope to see you tomorrow. All right, bye-bye.